The union of Sweden and Norway from 1814 to 1905 joined the two nations under a common monarch and foreign policy. It was the final step in a long period of Scandinavian unions. When we compare the two countries in 2024, one huge difference is that Sweden has completely ruined their country with extreme radical left politics and insane amounts of uncontrolled immigration with zero integration, huge amounts of segregation, almost zero punishments for criminals, and so on. Almost all of this has been done with almost full support of the population acting like ecstatic cheerleaders outwards in order to seem good-hearted, while they complain in secret to certain few friends they trust, but never say anything officially because they might lose their job and friends if they speak up. Norwegians, in comparison, on the other hand, are way more open to debate, balanced in their thinking, and aren't afraid to speak their mind and deal with hard issues in an open and nuanced way. They actually talk and deal with tough issues. Let's explore how Sweden destroyed itself by uncontrolled immigration. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The other side of this coin is even more heartbreaking. Traditionally, most people emigrate because they were interested in another country, fell in love, job opportunity. They wanted to leave their home country. But in the past 20 to 25 years, most people emigrate because they have no choice. It is a matter of survival. It is harder to leave a country where you were happy and content, but then a major catastrophic event takes place that gives you no choice. Syria is a perfect example. Yes, Assad was always a dictator, but people could avoid politics and be perfectly safe. Up until the day the civil war started, it was considered a desirable place to live, large middle class, decent job market, educated population, more relaxed than other Muslim countries. You combine the trauma of having to leave everything you have known with losing your economic standing, and you tend to be wistful about your homeland. If we take an example of Canadians, they are much more welcoming and outgoing than Swedes, so it's easier for newcomers to get a foot into Canadian society. The problem for Sweden is twofold. The Swedes aren't sure how to welcome or communicate with immigrants, and the immigrants aren't sure how to communicate or integrate with Swedes. The other piece that is missing is time. When we had mass immigration from Italy, many people complained that they never would integrate. People also complain about migrants failing to integrate. Syrians, Cubans, Vietnamese, Hungarians, Finns, Armenians, etc. Anytime a big group came at once, people said they would never integrate, but a generation down the line, they always did. Sweden has had these refugees for 8 years or less. That's not enough time for children to integrate. In Swedish politics, there's always been a firmly established faith in institutionalism and Swedish model. How we do things here is simply perfect, and it's the greatest system in the world, which every country ought to follow for. If they did, we'd have a perfect world. In this view of society, there was very little emphasis on individuals' necessity to conform to the system. 50 years or even 30 years ago, everyone in Sweden was conformed to how things were. It's just taken for granted that everyone realizes we have the perfect system and should have faith in the state and our institutions. With the first waves of immigration in the latter half of the 20th century, there were the typical racists and Nazis criticizing immigration as polluting the race. Immigration was heavily restricted to certain sectors with high demand for jobs, so there was never any question about immigrants becoming self-sufficient or stealing jobs for a saturated market. In the 2000s, city areas where the majority were immigrants from outside of Europe became a thing. But no problem. Kebab tastes good, and it's fun with some cultural diversity. But these areas grew larger and larger as the restrictions on immigration were removed and focused more towards accepting everyone from poor regions in the world, when it previously was focused on getting immigrants coming for specific jobs. It's much more difficult for an adult Somali man who can't read to get established in society compared to some Turkish or Croatian with a high school education coming specifically to work in a certain industry. After all, we're Sweden. We've got the perfect system. We can surely adapt to make everyone's lives great. Sure, some Somali adults might have a hard time, but he can live on state aid until he learns the language and to read and write. In the early 2010s, the idea that the Swedish system was perfect is still clear. More and more uneducated immigrants come, and more state aid is handed out. Meanwhile, a lot more people start voting for the Nationalist Party, which is the only party outwardly criticizing the immigration situation as unsustainable. Then comes Trump and starts saying exactly the same things as the Nationalist Party does. Of course, the Swedish government and its supporters in society lash out that this is not how it is, and it's just a racist lie propagated by the nationalist parties. Don't trust them, they're Nazis. Things are perfect over here. Then the Nationalist Party grows and becomes the third largest party in parliament with about 20% of votes. The former Liberal Right Alliance, consisting of 4 night parties, has split up because of a ton of reasons. 2 of these parties now start actually talking with the nationalists. Meanwhile, it becomes more and more difficult to ignore the shootings, grenades, organized mafias, and rampant unemployment in the majority immigrant areas, which now includes the whole city of Malmö, Sweden's 3rd largest city. Simply denying it as a non-problem was okay when a teenager got shot once a year, but now it's once a week and difficult to ignore. So everyone eventually came to accept that the Swedish system wasn't perfect. There's a ton of people who need to integrate into the workforce and be incentivized into jobs rather than state aid. All the parties to the right accepted this view of society about a couple of years ago, and simultaneously, the Social Democrats have done the same. Now 6 out of 8 parties in parliament say what only 1 out of 8 parties said in 2015. Sweden has an integration problem, and it's very much due to a high volume of immigration over a short amount of time. Sweden granted asylum to people from Africa and the Middle East in higher numbers since 2015, with higher rates of poverty, education, work skills, literacy, and language barrier lead to a mild increase in some crime when controlling for those aforementioned socioeconomic variables. The Swedish government and the university studies point out that racism within the police and other law enforcement contributes to this number. The rise in crime can be directly tied to a material condition of the immigrants still needing to buy food and pay rent at a minimum. The fascination with immigrants and crime is a tabloid thing that even the US does to increase viewership. From the point of view of an average Swede, Sweden has historically not seen gang violence. The violence is unique in that there is a bombing almost daily. Gang violence was around 2 to 3% of all deadly violence in the 90s. Now, it's above 40%. The amount of victims doubles every 3rd year. This doesn't even account for an increase in shootings without deadly outcomes, humiliation robberies, or how people in middle school carry out these crimes. The Swedish judicial system is also not designed for this. People under 18 get 4 years for a deadly shooting, and by law they are released after about 2.5 years. People actually get discounts for the amount of crimes they commit when it comes to sentencing. People actually get paid sometimes for crimes they commit because of these discounts and naive courts. Some studies reporting a link between immigration and crime have been criticized for not taking into account the population's age, employment, and education level, all of which can affect the level of crime. In general, research that takes these factors into account does not support the idea that there is a link between immigration and crime. A survey of several studies found that people with a foreign background are, on average, 2 times more likely to commit crimes than those born in Sweden. This figure has remained stable since the 1970s. Comment down below on what you think, and if you like this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing.